Psalm chapter number 25. And Lord willing, this is going to finish up our study on David and Bathsheba. This should finish us up today. And so Psalm chapter number 25, we've been going over the people that Bathsheba had to forgive. And obviously she had to forgive David, and she had to forgive Nathan, and she had to forgive God. And the last person that we're going to look at today, Miss Jimmy's the last person she had to forgive. And I said this many weeks ago, and when I said it, my wife's like, I need a clear, you know how it is, Brother Parks. You get in the vehicle. She's like, I need a clarification. What did you mean by that right there? And so I said it many weeks ago. She said, I mean, you're saying that you don't think it was Bathsheba's fault, but you said she had to forgive herself. And I did say that, and I do mean that. I do mean that. And so we're gonna go over that this week. We're gonna look at that this week, how that even though I don't think Bathsheba was in the wrong, just because you're not in the wrong doesn't mean in your mind, in your conscience, you don't bear that. And so I thought about, that's what I've been thinking about. So in Psalm chapter number 25, in verse number 6, and I know this is a psalm of David, but you'll see what I'm talking about here in a second. It says, Remember, O Lord, thy tender mercies and thy loving kindnesses, for they have been ever of old. Remember not the sins of my youth, nor my transgressions. According to thy mercy, remember thou me for thy goodness' sake, O Lord. And so David is saying here in this psalm, he's obviously an older man now, and he's an older man, and he's looking back at his life, and some things in his mind popped up. There's some things in his mind that popped up, and he said, remember not the sins of my youth. And again, we understand that, once you're saved, and then after you're saved, if you commit a sin, you ask God to forgive you of that sin. He's going to forgive you of that sin. And that sin is gone in God's mind. But it's not always gone in your mind. And so that's where David was at right here, was he's asked, no doubt he's asked forgiveness. We looked at Psalm 51. We went over all that. He asked for forgiveness, but here he is. He's just sitting alone sometime, Brother Croft, and something pops in his mind, and he's like, remember not the sins of my youth. And so I thought about that, and I'm sure every one of us in here can think of some, can just think of some things in their life where they're like, man, wish I hadn't done that right there. Wish I hadn't said that. And it's funny because, again, like I said, you sometimes you have to get forgiveness from a person. Sometimes you have, or you just get forgiveness from God. But, you do something. And you can be strolling along and not think about it for years and years and years, and just something triggers it, and it brings that thought back up in your mind, and there for a second, you feel guilt over it again. Even though it's under the blood and it's gone, you feel this guilt that comes back for a second. I can think of things that I said years and years and years ago. Years ago, Brother Parks, and actually, I think of stuff that I said years ago, and it'll just come up. I'll think about somebody, and I'll be like, man, I tell you what, I wish I could just, I wish I could go back and change that moment in time. I wish I could go back and change that moment. And sometimes it's not that you said anything, it's just how you reacted. There was a time in my life where a guy was looking at me, and something traumatic happened, but it didn't necessarily happen to him. But it was something that's traumatic happened. I'll tell you what it was. It was when Dale Earnhardt died. Dale Earnhardt died, and this guy's like, you need to pray for, and he named off their kids. And Brother Croft, it was serious to him, but I didn't take it as serious as I should have, for him. And it hurt him. It hurt mine and his relationship, because he felt like me as a Christian, I should have took it more serious, and I should have. And I think about that often, how that just that one, it was just one little split second, and he asked me to pray for him, and I said I would, but I just didn't take it as serious, and he realized I didn't take it as serious as he wanted me to take it, and it hurt our relationship. And that's been 20, however long Dale Earnhardt died, 20 years ago or more. But every once in a while, the guy actually works for, he actually got me hired on at the place I work now. And he works for a different air compressor company, and every once in a while I'll see one of their trucks go by, and I don't know whether it's him in that truck or not, but it'll bring that conversation back up to my mind. And so that's what I'm talking about. That's what we're going to be talking about this morning, is there are things in people's lives we don't even know. I think we were having a conversation the other day with someone, and the conversation went, you have no idea. You have absolutely no idea what goes on in the minds and in the hearts of people, even sitting in a church. Even sitting in a church, you have no idea of the things that people have been through. We look at people in church, and you're like, oh, well, I mean, they've had an excellent childhood, and they've got good parents, and they've been sheltered, and we try to do all of that. We try and do all of that, and if you really knew them, you would find out that there was some point in their life where somehow the devil got in just long enough to get to them. He got in just long enough to get to them for something to happen in their life, and they've never gotten over it. They've never gotten over it. I think about it. I don't want to say I'm older, because I don't feel like I'm older, but I'm mid-40s, and so when I was a kid growing up, it was Vietnam veterans. That were the ones that got over it. Now, it was the Afghanistan war and the Iraq war. But I mean, there are people that there were people from Vietnam, and I'm growing up late 80s, early 90s. So you're 15, 16 years removed. Actually, yeah, it would have been 15, 16 years removed from there, and they were still not functioning members of society. They were not functioning members of society because of stuff they had seen and stuff they had done when they were in that war, and they were 15, 16 years, and they'd spent the rest of those years just with a bottle in their hand, or with some kind of mind-altering drug constantly in their system, because if they ever come off of it just for a minute, it would come flooding back in. And so here is David, and he has one of those moments where he's just sitting there, and he said, remember not the sins of my youth. And I thought about in Bathsheba's instance, again, like I said, I mean, she committed adultery. Whether she was a willing participant or not, like I said, we can agree to disagree, we can agree or whatever. But no matter what, legally, she committed adultery. Legally, she committed adultery. And from that moment on, that was on her conscience. And so anytime you do something like that, like I said, we as Christians, we understand that we have the ability to repent of our sins and ask God to forgive us of our sins, and He's, faithful and just to forgive us our sins. We understand that. But the devil is going to do his best to constantly keep reminding you, and we talked about this however long ago, whenever I was talking about people that doubt their salvation. When I was talking about people that doubt their salvation, they do something, and then because of that, they feel like, oh great, maybe I wasn't saved. But the devil's going to constantly bring that thing up to them. If you're a Christian, why did you do that? If you were a Christian, why did you let that happen? If you were a Christian, why? And it's the same thing here. Here is Bathsheba, and she has to bear that on her conscience. And you have a choice. You have a choice. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here, but you have a choice. You have to learn to get over it. And sometimes that's easier said than done. I mean, it's easy for me to say, hey, you just need to learn to get over it. That's easy for me to say because I don't know what you've been through. I don't know what you've been through. But unfortunately, what I'm saying is true, whether I've been through what you've been through or not, you have to learn to get over it. If you don't learn to get over it, you're gonna turn into a hermit. You're going to turn into a shell of yourself, a shell of what you could be. Why? Because you're constantly beating yourself up over, and I wrote down a lot of things, about what could I have done different? What could I have said different? How could I have changed the situation? What if I hadn't done this? What if you can't live your life like that. Again, like I said, you go through the Bible, and that's what I love about the Bible is God showed us people all through the Bible, and He showed us their good side and their bad side, Miss Jimmy. He showed us when they did good, when they were right, when they were faithful, but He also showed us that they weren't perfect people. And God understands, and I said it, a while back whenever we were talking about this, that Jesus told Peter, "You're going to deny me. You're going to do it. And when you do it, once you're converted, then go strengthen the brethren." And God understands you're going to do it. But what if Peter, after he denied the Lord, said, "Can't get over it. How can I go preach to others? How can I go preach to others? How can I go say anything to others that you ought to love God? How can I go say anything to anybody?" He had to get over it. And some people's, we don't talk about it a lot. I know Miss Diane studied a lot. My wife studied it. But different people have different personalities. Different people have different personalities, and some people have like strong traits in their, they're leaders, they're natural born leaders, and some people are just natural followers. They're not ever going to be a leader. They're just a sheep. They have to be told what to do, and that's all they're ever going to be. But there's also personalities that there's personalities that just run over people. There's personalities that just get run over. And there's personalities that do things and they don't even think twice about it. But there are other personalities that do something and they replay it over and over and over and over and over and over in their mind. And there's not a thing they can do about it. There's not a thing they can do about it. In Philippians chapter number 3, I'm going to take a verse out of context right here. I'm going to take a verse out of context, so y'all forgive me, but I'm just going to pull one little piece out of a verse. Philippians 3, verse number 13, Paul says, "Brethren, I count not myself to apprehended, but this one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind, and reaching forth unto those things which are before." I'm pulling out one little section, forgetting those things which are behind. Why do you got to forget those things that are behind? Can you change them? Can you change them? Most people that have truly repented, you've truly repented of that sin because you're like, well, if I could go back, I would go back and I would change it. I would go back. I would make it right. I would make it different. But, a lot of times you can't. You can't go back. You can't go fix it. You can't. I cannot change. I cannot change. I could take you to where that happened, where I was talking about whenever Dale Arnold. I could take you to where that happened. The guy was sitting up in a van. It was right there at our shop, and I come walking by, and he hollered at me and said, "Hey, I need you to pray for," and he named their names. I could take you to that spot, Brother Parks, but was 20-some years ago. But what good would it be for me to take you to that spot? I can't fix it. It's over with. And I had to tell God, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. If there's something I can do to make it up to that guy, let me make it up to that guy. But it's never been made up. But can I live the rest of my life just beating myself up over that? No. You have to move on. You have to move on. You have to learn from your mistakes. I'm not saying just, completely erase things out of your mind. If you get a speeding ticket on the way to work tomorrow and be like, hey, he said forget those things which are behind, and the next day you're doing the same speed and you get a speeding ticket again, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But you have to learn from your mistakes. Yeah, learn from them, but don't sit there and beat yourself up your whole entire life over something that happened 10, 15, 20, 25 years ago that you cannot change. You have no power to change it. And Paul said right here, he said, forgetting those things which are behind. And we know Paul's story. You think about, Paul persecuted Christians before he became one. He was a giant in the Jewish faith of persecuting the Christians. And no doubt when he first got saved, people were like, I don't know about, there's the guy that used to persecute the church, now all of a sudden he wants to be one of us. And he just had to acknowledge, yes, this is who I was, but that's not who I am anymore, and go on. And just go on. And so this morning, again, like I said, I'm talking to people that say that you may never tell anybody, you may never tell a soul what it is that you beat yourself up over. You may never tell a soul this is what happened because you're so ashamed. But I'm saying this morning, God wants you to go on. God wants you to go on. He wants you to accept His forgiveness, and move on and be a help to somebody else. Be a help to someone else. Again, like I said, there are things that happen to people, and they'll just about become a hermit over it. They'll just draw into themselves, and they'll hide out, and they won't want to come out of the house because of something that happened years and years and years ago. And the longer they go, the more they're just comfortable just not even ever coming out of the house. And if you get to the root of it, the root cause of it, you find out it was something, and it may not have even been their fault. It may not have even been their fault, but it happened. And because it happened, they're like, if I go out, someone might say something. If I go out, I may see somebody that knows. What if I see somebody that knows? They know that I did this. Again, with Bathsheba, you think about it. She committed adultery with David, and then she ended up pregnant, and Uriah ends up killed, and then they end up married, and God even said the heathen knew about it. And it was a cause for the heathen to blaspheme because they knew about it. And so there was no hiding what she did. There was no hiding it, Even though, again, like I said many times, I don't think it was her fault, but there was no hiding it. And so here she is, she's carrying that child, and she's with child, and then once she loses that child, how many times do you think just looking at someone that she felt like they were saying, you deserve to lose that child? You know how it is. Sometimes people don't have to say anything. You read words just in their facial expressions. Just stand up here and teach sometime. You'll be like, it's not going over well today. You read words into people's facial expressions. You're like, hey, the guy's not happy with me right now. Or, hey, that was a pretty funny joke. They're actually smiling right there. But you understand, you read words, and sometimes you think you read something that's not even there. Sometimes my wife will be like, why are you mad at me? I didn't know I was mad. Well, I think you're mad at me. I'm not mad at you. Well, you're not saying anything. Well, just because I'm not talking doesn't mean that I am mad. But she reads into it that I must be mad because I'm not talking. Sometimes I'm just thinking. And sometimes I'm a zoner outer. Like if I start thinking about something, I'm in that zone. And like you can be, coming right by here, and I'm like, sorry, I'm in my zone. And so they'll, sometimes she'll be like, I'll just start laughing. She's like, well, what did I say that was funny? You didn't say anything that was funny. I was just thinking about something, and it was funny. And so, but you understand, but here's Bathsheba, and every time she walked, again, she was not David's only wife. Imagine walking through the palace, and here's David's other wives. Do you think she was treated well? Do you think she was treated, like, oh, I'm so glad you're part of the family now? I don't think that happened. And then here, if you remember, here's her granddad Ahithophel, and he never got over it. Never. The man committed suicide because of it. The man committed suicide after he did all he could do to help Absalom defeat David. When he realized it wasn't going to happen, whenever he realized that his counsel was defeated, and that Absalom wasn't going to do what was good counsel, but he wasn't going to do it, he went and committed suicide because he could not get over it. Do you think when Bathsheba saw Ahithophel, she didn't know that he was angry over it? If he's so angry, Brother Parks, that he waited years for his opportunity to get back at David, and the thing that he told Absalom to do in front of all the people that I'm not gonna mention, but most of y'all know what I'm talking about. That's a man that's bitter. He never got over it. Do you think it was easy for Bathsheba to see Ahithophel? Do you think it was easy for her to see him? But you know what Bathsheba had to do? Bathsheba had to get over it. She had to get over it. You either continue to be a functioning member of society by getting over it, or you turn into a shell of yourself because you never get over it. The devil would prefer you to just turn into a shell of yourself. You have all the forgiveness from God and all the grace from God sitting out there, but if he can, he'll beat you up every single day of your life, if he can. How could you do that? How could you, how could you let that happen? I think about, there's a preacher, he's preached in this pulpit. He's preached in this pulpit a couple times since I've been here. And as a child, he was messed with by an adult relative. And a little boy, child. And you can tell when he mentions it to this day, and the man's in his 50s right now. When he mentions it to this day, he still feels shame, and there wasn't a single thing he could do about it. Wasn't a single thing he could do about it, Miss Jimmy. But he feels the shame. I never got the whole story, never asked for the whole story. But he's the one that brings it up in his preaching, and he still feels shame to this day. And wasn't a thing he could do about it. There are women. There are women who have been, trying to think of the right terminology here, but there are women who have been approached. We'll leave it at that. There are women who have been approached, and they go home feeling vile and sick and dirty, and they couldn't have done a single thing about it. They couldn't do a thing about it. But they go home and they're like, what if I'd have dressed a little bit different? And I don't care if you dress like an Amish lady. I don't care if you dress like a Mennonite. There are some people, we live in a different age. There are some women that are that way now. But, there are just some men, they just don't care. They don't care. What if I'd addressed him? Well, did I look at them wrong? Did they read something into my look? Did I say something I shouldn't have said? And they run through this woulda, coulda, shoulda, what if I'd have done it? And they're constantly living under this shadow of condemnation over something they had no control over. And they start to turn in, and they start to push society away. They start to push other people out. Why? Because of fear that, oh, what if it happens to me again? What if it happens again? What if that is who I am? What if that is who I am? And it's just a natural thing that people, it's going to happen again and again and again, so they turn in on themselves. And there wasn't a single thing they could have done about it. Again, like I said, I imagine if you could sit down and just talk, again, if you talk to someone and the more you find out, you'd be like, man, that happened to you too? Yeah, yes, it did. But I never want to talk about it. I never want to mention it. I never want to bring it up. Why? Because you feel shame over something that happened to you that you had no control over. Here's Bathsheba, and again, like I said, I don't think she had control over the situation. It said, David said, hey, who is she? He saw her taking a bath. He said, hey, who is she? It's the wife of Uriah the Hittite, the daughter of Eliam. Go take her. Bring her up here. Committed adultery with her. I don't think she had any control. Whatever you think, that's your opinion. But I don't think she had any control, Jake. But now she has to live with that the rest of her life. She has to live with that the rest of her life, and she's got a choice. She could have locked herself in a room somewhere, and even though she ended up, again, Uriah is slain, and David says, go down there and fetch her. Go get her. Go get her. Tell her she's going to be my wife now. And all those bad things that just happened and happened and happened. And sometimes it's just like a wave. It just hits you. And then another wave hits you. And then another wave hits you. First, it was adultery. Then she's pregnant. Then her husband dies. Now she's married, but she has the baby. And God says the baby's going to die. Now the baby dies. And it's just wave after wave after wave after wave. And she could have said, this is all my fault. Had I just not, and whatever. And just turned into a shell of herself and just turned in on herself and said, I don't even want to live anymore. I don't even want to live anymore. I don't even want to live anymore. I don't want anyone. I don't want to look into one more person's eyes and think, I wonder if they know. I wonder if they know. I wonder why they're smirking when they see me. I wonder why they're grinning when they see me. I wonder why they're scowling when they see me. I wonder. But instead, she said no. And she ended up raising Solomon and raising those other boys and doing right. And if she could get over it, you can get over it. Again, I don't know what you've done. I don't know what you've done. But there's things that all of us have done. Like I said, I just brought one example up. But, there are things that all of us have done. There are things that like I said, things that have been said that you're like, man, why did I say that? What in the world was I thinking when I said that right there? and so in John chapter number 8, verse number 1, says, Jesus went unto the Mount of Olives, and early in the morning he came again into the temple, and all the people came down unto him, and he sat down and taught them. And the scribes and Pharisees brought unto him a woman taken in adultery. And when they had set her in the midst, they said unto him, Master, this woman was taken in adultery in the very act. Now, this has always fascinated me because I'm not the smartest person in the world, but I do think I am smart enough to figure out that if you're taken in adultery, there should have been another person there. There should have been another person there. It's pretty much impossible to commit adultery unless there's two people there. But there's only ever this woman mentioned. There's only ever this woman mentioned. And so the Pharisees, the scribes and Pharisees, they bring this woman to Jesus and they say, hey, this woman was taken in adultery in the very act. Now, again, it sounds like, hey, they caught her in the act. And again, like I said, should have been a second person there. Wasn't a second person there, but in the very act. In verse number 5, now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what sayest thou? This they said, tempting him that they might have to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down with his finger, wrote on the ground, as though he heard them not. So again, here's this woman. She's taken in adultery. She's probably on the ground right there, and they've surrounded them, and here's Jesus, and here's the scribes and Pharisees surrounding them, and they're like, well, what do you say? What do you say? What do you say about it? Tell us what you say about it. She was taken in the very act. You know what the law says. She was taken in the very act. What do you say about it? And so Jesus, acting like he didn't hear them, it says that he took with his finger on the ground as though he heard them not. And he just writes something on the ground. Wouldn't you love to know what it was he wrote on the ground? Wouldn't you love to know what it was? Brother Jay, I almost think he wrote something that he knew they were all guilty of and just wrote that down. Just wrote that down. Like, you know how it is, just like liar, or just something, just deceiver. Or maybe he wrote a name of someone, be like, hey, what about this person? Just to let them know that I know who you are. While you're making this terrible accusation against her, I know who you are. I know what your sin is. I know what your sin is, and your sin, and your sin, and your sin. I know what all your sins are. And somehow he was able to just stoop down in the ground and write something down that every one of them, when they look down, they're like, oh, he does know. He does know. And we're just as guilty. We're just as guilty. And whatever their sin was, they were condemned in their heart just as much to say, hey, if we condemn her, we're about to condemn ourselves. He said, so when they continued asking him, he lifted up himself and said unto him, he that is without sin among you, let him cast a stone at her. Brother Jay, they came to the party wanting to see her stoned. They came to the party wanting to see her stoned. Some of them probably brought stones with them. They probably brought some stones with them, hoping to see her stoned. They came to that party, and he stooped down and wrote that on the ground, and he looked up and said, hey, which one of you is without sin? Which one of you is without sin? You're like, I can't be around those people. I feel like they judge me. Just remember, they probably do. They probably do. But they're not your final judge. They're not your final judge. I don't want to lie and say, I don't want to lie, Ben, and say I don't judge people. I do. If you're honest with me, you'll say, hey, I do too. Well, walk on a job site and be like, hey, that guy works really hard. Hey, that guy's pretty lazy right there. You do it. You just do. And so here Jesus is like, hey, I know y'all have judged her, but I need you to judge yourself. And you know what? Just because I may look at you and be like, I'm not your final judge. I'm not your final judge. And once you made peace with your final judge, does it really matter whether the person that used to talk to you won't talk to you anymore? Does it really matter? So Jesus, he says, hey, he said, he that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her. And again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. So he wrote some more. Just wrote some more on the ground. And anyone there, you know, and you're going to see it in a second, but anyone there, you know, because sometimes the younger people are like, oh, we're going to do this. But it's the older people that common sense comes to first sometimes. It's the older people that are like, oh, wait a second, he's got us. Like, checkmate. Boom, boom, we're checkmated. If we cast the stone, he's going to be like, you are worthy of death also. You are worthy of it because of this person. You are worthy of it because you did this sin. And he had them checkmated, Brother Jay. And then when the older people find out first, and it says, and they which heard it being convicted by their own conscience. So whatever it was he wrote on the ground, they looked down and like, I didn't think anybody knew about that. I didn't ever want that brought up. I didn't think we would ever talk about that. I thought I had that hidden. But you're not hiding anything from God. Being convicted of their own conscience, went out one by one, beginning at the eldest, even unto the last. Can you imagine being the last one there, standing there with a stone, last one there, and like look around, like it's just Jesus, the woman taking adultery, and you, everyone else has already left, and you're like, I guess I'll set my stone down too. Just walk on. And Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. And when Jesus had lifted up himself and saw none but the woman, he said unto her, Woman, where are thine accusers? Hath no man condemned thee? She said, No man, Lord. Again, she was taken in adultery, the very act. And again, we don't know the story. We don't know whether she was the one that started the adultery, or if she was just taken in adultery and it was not her fault. But for whatever reason, Jesus took this opportunity to say, hey, in verse number 11, Jesus said unto her, Neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more. Now, he didn't give her license to sin. He didn't give her a justification to sin. He didn't say, hey, you know what, you're good now. They'll never be able to judge you again. He didn't do any of those things. He didn't do any of those things. But what he did do is say, I'm not going to condemn you either. Go and sin no more. And here's Bathsheba. And no doubt in her mind, Brother Jay, that she knew she was guilty of adultery, but somehow God let her get that forgiveness for what she had done or was done to her, and she was able to move on. She was able to move on from it. She was able to get past it. In Psalm chapter number 51, we read it when David was talking about it, but in Psalm chapter number 51, in verse number 14, it says, Deliver me from blood guiltiness, O God. Thou God of my salvation, and my tongue shall sing aloud of thy righteousness. O Lord, open thou my lips, and my mouth shall show forth thy praise. For thou desirest not sacrifice, else would I give it. Thou delightest not in burnt offerings. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. O God, thou wilt not despise. But he said right there, he said, God, deliver me. He said, I want you to clean my conscience. And there are a lot of people that are walking around that even though God has forgiven them, they've never let God cleanse their conscience. They've never let God cleanse their conscience. And so even though God was willing and did forgive them of their sin, they keep that in their mind and keep that in their conscience. And they live with that day after day, month after month, year after year, and their conscience has never been cleared. And you say, how can that be? Because the devil doesn't want you to get your conscience cleared. He doesn't want you to get your conscience cleared because he knows that as long as your conscience is guilty, you're going to keep your mouth closed. You're not going to tell people how good God is. You're not going to tell people how wonderful God is. You're not going to tell people that God will forgive you. You're not going to talk to people about God. You're just going to keep it into yourself. And like I said, there are a lot of people that again, God can forgive them. God will forgive them. God a lot of times has forgiven them. But just like David, many years later, it's like, remember not the sins of my youth. They're still trying to confess sins that they confessed many years before. Many years ago, they confessed this sin. But it came back up to mind, and they're like, oh, God, forgive me for that. God already forgave you for that. When that thing comes back up in your mind, it's not, oh, God, forgive me of that. Oh, God, clear my conscience of that. Clear my conscience. Take that out of my conscience and don't let the devil use that against me ever again. He's already forgiven you of the sin. If you've asked him and you've repented of it, he's already forgave you. But have you asked him to clear your conscience? And have you accepted it when he has? I think Bathsheba, the last person she had to forgive was herself. And from the raising of Solomon, again, I'm reading a lot into it, but from the raising of Solomon, and how good she did raising Solomon, I think she did a pretty good job of learning to get over it. Thank you.